Everyone, welcome to this video lesson on tissue by Imtiaz Dharker. Please make sure that you've got a copy of the poem to hand, your trusty pen, a highlighter if you've got one, and also some spare paper. Your first task today is to think about how many different uses paper has and to come up with a list. Press pause on the video to give yourself time to jot down some ideas and then press play when you're ready. You'll probably come up with quite an extensive list of uses, but I'd like you to ensure that these ones are on there. So if you need to, can you please add maps, banknotes, receipts, religious text and certificates. Pause the video to give yourself time to add any of those that you need to your list and then press play when you're ready. Now with these uses in mind, I'd like you to consider what you feel paper could be symbolic of. Pause the video to have a think, share ideas on your Google Classroom conversation stream, and then press play when you're ready to move on. Your next task is to bullet point some information about Imtiaz Dharker. So born in Pakistan but raised in Glasgow, she now lives between Britain and India. The poem Tissue is taken from her 2006 collection called The Terrorist at My Table, and this collection questions how well we know the people around us. She's written 5 collections of poetry and she often deals with themes of identity, the role of women in contemporary society and the search for meaning. And she draws on her multicultural experience in her work. Now have a read through the poem and jot down any initial impressions. I'd now like you to read the poem again, and this time as you read through I'd like you to highlight all the words that relate to either power or fragility. So what is tissue about? Let's start by taking a look at the first few quatrains, and here we have created a sense of power, that something as fragile as paper can still be really significant. It can carry a great deal of power. And the first way in which she makes paper seem important is in its use in books and in its use in religion. And this idea of paper being powerful is then further strengthened with the recording of people's lives. So people's births, people's deaths, people's weights, etc., etc. And these next few verses create a sense of the fragility, the apparent weakness of paper. So paper may be seen as unsuitable, as building anything substantial, long-lasting in the real world. And here we could start to perhaps look at different interpretations. So is paper, is tissue reflective of human life and the way that that is also short and only temporary? And these last few verses are weighing up the fragility and the substance, and the writer sees a living power in something as delicate as skin. Now let's bullet point some information about form and structure. So as you've just seen, there are 3 main parts of this poem. It moves through ideas about history, onto human experience and the creation of life. Now take a look at the poet's use of enjambment between the stanzas. What does that suggest to you? Pause the video to give yourself time to gather some thoughts and then press play when you're ready. So this use of enjambment could suggest the poet's own desire for freedom, or it could suggest the lack of control that humans have compared to that of nature. The poem is also written in free verse, so it doesn't follow any rhyming scheme or have a metre. What does that suggest to you? Again, pause the video to give yourself time to gather thoughts and then press play when you're ready. So we could argue that the poem is written in free verse to represent humans' inability to control nature or even to control their own lives. Now take a look at the use of those short stanzas. What do you think that could be representative of? Pause the video to gather some thoughts and then press play as you feel ready. So here we have the poem with the use of short stanzas, so it builds up layer after layer. So that kind of reinforces the idea that human lives are also built up in layers. And we finish with that final line, don't we? That single line containing direct address. What's the impact of that? Again, give yourself time to gather some thoughts and then press play when you're ready. So this final line, it stands out from the rest of the poem. So it really focuses the reader's attention on their own identity and how it was created. Okay, now let's start to take a look at some of the language that's used. Let's go for light imagery with paper that lets the light shine through. This has religious connotations, and it also alludes to how thin and fragile paper is, and therefore how thin and fragile human power is. Pause the video to give yourself time to make some notes and consider the further connotations of the word light, and then press play as you feel ready. So light has connotations of allowing things to be seen rather than hidden. So this could be hinting at what might need to change. And if we think about light as being a metaphor for God, this could read as a comment on the power of religion to instigate change. And then here, highlighted in green, we have language which relates to thinness and transparency. So these images of touching are very gentile, very tactile, and really reflect the respect shown to the books and particularly towards religious texts. Now take a look at the section highlighted in blue. Why do you think the poet has mentioned the Quran? Pause the video to give yourself time to gather some thoughts and then press play when you feel ready. So mentioning the Quran broadens the importance of paper. It can be used to record belief systems. It also signifies the importance and respect and value assigned to record keeping. Paper is used to record family histories. Whole lives can be summed up by the marks on paper. So this really emphasises the power of paper in recording history. Now take a look at the use of the last word, attention, and that comes before the first full stop in this poem. What effect does that have on you? What does it make you do? Pause the video to give yourself time to think and then press play as you feel ready. So the use of attention as the last word before the first full stop in this poem really emphasises the importance of what's come before. Here, the poet uses language that's normally associated with transience, so something that's short-lived. We have use of drift and shift. So this really reminds us as the reader of the fragility of paper. And the language that's used in this whole stanza is really the poet inviting us to see how temporary, how ephemeral, how short-lasting human structures are through asking us to imagine them being built out of paper. So what do you make of this? We've got a shift in tone. We've got the poet suggesting that if buildings were only made of paper, we would notice that they were only temporary. Is there a hint here that she is referring to an event from modern history? Pause the video and have a think and then press play when you're ready. Okay, so when I read this and I think about buildings falling, my mind immediately goes to something which is branded on my memory, which is 9/11. I wonder if you thought the same thing. Now let's take a look at maps 2, the sun shines through their borderlines. Firstly, I'd like you to consider the effect of that short, blunt sentence, maps to full stop. Pause the video to give yourself time to have a think and then press play as you feel ready. So this short, blunt sentence could reflect on the fixed nature of maps and borders and how they create a division rather than freedom of people. However, the sun shines through their borderlines. What does that suggest to you? Again, pause the video to give yourself time to think and then press play as you're ready. So we have this beautiful imagery, don't we? The sun shines through their borderlines. It doesn't care about the borders, about the marks that man has made on his maps. It completely ignores them. It shines through everything. Man has no control over where the sun shines. And here we have further evidence of man's attempt to make sense of nature with the marks that rivers make, roads, rail tracks, mountain folds. So here we can contrast man's attempt with the making of his maps with the far more powerful and natural power of the sun. The next thing I'd like you to do is take a look at the list, roads, rail tracks and mountain folds, and I would like you to pause the video and consider what that list highlights for you. Press play as you feel ready. So we could say that this list highlights for us man's determination to make sense of nature, to control it, to dominate it. And we could consider taking it a step further again and referencing it to conflict, because conflict often arises over land and territory disputes. Take a look at the simile, what was paid by credit card might fly our lives like paper kites. What do you think that simile is suggesting? Press pause to give yourself time to think and then press play when you feel ready. So this simile could be the poet suggesting that our lives are controlled, they're dominated by money, and could also suggest that we cause our own conflict by assigning such importance to material things and money. The use of consonants with brick or block emphasises the solidity of the objects, and this is strengthened by the use of enjambment, which adds more impact to these words. And here we have natural imagery being contrasted with man-made structures, with daylight break through capitals and monoliths. So this really highlights for us that nature's power will always be more potent than man-made creations. Now, capitals and monoliths are, of course, symbolic of government and human power. So perhaps think about the White House, for example. So this could be the poet being critical of human pride. You know, we create these big, imposing buildings which are ultimately unimportant. And then we have repetition of paper smoothed and stroked and thinned to be transparent. This really cements the idea that paper is fragile, that human life is only temporary, and it reminds us that we're all part of this complex, lasting family history. And then we finish with this isolated line with direct address turned into your skin. And remember, that focuses the reader's attention on their own identity and how it's created. So there you go. Not the easiest poem in the world to understand, but hopefully you found this video helpful. These are some comments by other teachers about their students' reactions to this poem and what they felt it was about. If in the future you're asked to compare this poem regarding nature versus human power, you'll find it compares really well to Ozymandias, Exposure, The Prelude or Storm on the Island. On the next couple of slides are some tasks which your teacher might well direct you to complete or which you may wish to complete independently. So here I'd like you to find quotations from the poem to support each of these key themes and then analyse them. Don't forget, it's always important to plan before you respond to an exam style question. So for example, some of you might want to draw a Big Venn diagram and pop in some ideas about similarities and differences between how the two poets present their ideas before starting on your response.